Well, good day. The clock is ticking. Will you be ready and compliant to meet the CMMC requirements? We've all seen increased global cybersecurity concerns. So the U.S. Department of Defense has introduced the CMMC requirement for federal contractors. Now, this framework specifically protects federal contract information, FCI, and controlled unclassified information, otherwise known as CUI. So today I'd ask you to engage with our experts to ensure that you are prepared to meet the compliance requirement. Now, before we dive into today's conversation, let's meet our panelists. And I'm going to have each one of them introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Steve. Steve, over to you.
All right, thanks, Rick. Hey, this is Steve Bergman. I'm the Facility Security Officer for Black & Veatch Federal. I've been doing this about 4 years. Prior to that, in 2017, I retired from the FBI as a special agent, working mostly counterintelligence issues in Chicago, Washington, D.C., and Kansas City. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. William, over to you.
Yes, I'm a electrical engineer and a computer engineer with a cybersecurity background. I'm also a previous small business owner. For 10 years, I owned a building automations control company. And at Black & Veatch, I do telecommunications, security, and cybersecurity design for the Corps of Engineers and also for the DoD.
Great. Thank you, William. Cheryl, over to you.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Pittman. I'm a Solutions Delivery Project Manager and Client Development Consultant with over 20 years of IT experience and have implemented several security projects within the utility sector.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl. John, over to you.
Hello, my name is John. I'm a CMMC AB Provisional Assessor, currently becoming a CMMC AB Instructor. I've been doing cybersecurity projects for over 20 years.
Thanks, John. Well, it's a great topic today, and I think the first thing I'd like to ask, what is CMMC, and what does it mean to me? That's probably one of the biggest questions people have. Cheryl, can you start to answer that? What is CMMC, and why do I care?
Yes, Rick, I'll start off with what is CMMC. I think the first thing we need to do is talk about what the acronym stands for. So CMMC stands for Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And as you stated, the U.S. Department of Defense designed it specifically to protect federal contract information and controlled unclassified information. The CMMC framework is built upon the NIST 800-171 and the DFARS regulations. So if your organization is familiar with those standards, then CMMC is going to be familiar to you. Along with an additional 20 requirements or controls, and it also has a 5-tier maturity model. This certification can't be achieved through self-certification as been previously done. Yet the organizations are now going to have to seek an independent third-party accredited assessor to evaluate you against these standards. So all defense industrial-based contractors are going to have to comply. And I think I'll pivot over to Steve to talk about how that impacts federal contractors.
Sure. Thanks, Cheryl. So I think the important part to remember is that, if you want to be, as a member of the DIB, like Cheryl said, if you're seeing a contract that comes up and your company wants to bid on it, eventually those contracts are going to have clauses in them that are going to set forth a maturity level 1 through 5. And then you have to sort of go through that process of, well, what is that contract talking about? What level do I need to be? All things we'll get into today. But in order to be able to put a bid in for that, you're going to have to get certified. It's really your choice not to, but again, if you don't, those will not be available to you. And that's, as far as the time frame, I think that's to be determined, but we'll talk about getting ready as well during the call today.
Great. Thanks, Steve and Cheryl. So I'd remind everybody that's out there listening today, if you got a question, put it in the comment box and we'll certainly get to it. And I'm sure for some of the folks who are out there participating today, you got a question that might be, hey, how do I know if CMMC applies to some of the projects that I'm doing or some of the projects that I might consider doing, whether directly or indirectly with the DoD? William, any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. CMMC is a really hot topic right now. And it's something that's been needed for a really long time. However, it's kind of slow to get started because of the pure size of it and the responsibility. So the short question is not this minute, but there's so much involved that you need to be thinking about it now and preparing now, because a lot of this is either a yes or no scenario. So you're either prepared and you get certified, or you find out, oh, I thought I was prepared, but I'm not really. And then you may lose thousands or millions of dollars worth of contracts that you thought you were going to get. So it's very important that we prepare right now.
Great. Any other thoughts on that? So related to that, then I would ask another question. So we see that CMMC is going to be important for future projects that we may go after. But what about a timeline? What's the real purpose of this certification? And Steve, you hit on a little bit, but what are the timelines we're talking about? If I'm working on a federal project today, do I have to be compliant today? William, I'm going to turn that back to you, and maybe if you could discuss some of the issues with that.
Sure. So basically, the timeline breakdown is their goal is by 2025 to have all projects for the DoD have a CMMC requirement. If you're dealing with the federal contract information or unclassified information, it's going to be part of your contract. And so this is something that you really want to step up and be proactive in getting. Now, there's going to be a transition time, and just with the sheer number of contracts, it may take longer than that. However, it's one of those things where you don't want to be caught unprepared, because you're either prepared and you get certified, or you think you're prepared and then you have to go through the recertification process again because you don't have all your ducks in a row.
Yeah, that's important. John, can you add anything to that?
Sure. I would like to mention that the whole point of this is to show maturity of the organization. And a lot of organizations may want to wait or think they can just get certified at the time of the contract, and really you probably won't. The C3PAOs would like to see some history that you've met all the practices and met all the controls.
Yeah, so that's an important point. But so if I'm out there listening right now, I'm still thinking to myself, okay, I need to get certified. Where do I go to get help? Where do I find, you said I can't do it myself. So where can I find third-party folks that can help assist my organization in this?
I can address that. I think to get prepared, there are organizations out there such as Black & Veatch that are registered provider organizations that can offer services to help get you prepared. Now, if you are already prepared or believe you're prepared, you can you're an organization seeking certification. And so you would go out to the CMMC AB website and find organizations within that accreditation body that are certified or accredited to perform these assessments for you. And so I can provide the link to the CMMC AB website, which will take you to a link to show you. And as of today, there are 4 organizations that have been accredited to perform these assessments.
Super. Anybody want to add to that? John, Steve, any thoughts?
I do have one thought, and this is really, Rick, to address your previous question, in that, people may be wondering, when talking about a timeline and, hey, am I already behind the 8 ball? One thing to really remember is that CMMC is not retroactive on the current contracts that you have. So in other words, whatever your contract base is, the government and DoD is not going to come back at you and say, hey, you're not certified on this contract at a maturity level 3 or 2 or 1, whatever it may be. This is all forward leaning, forward thinking. Again, like John and several of the panelists have mentioned, you don't want to wait too long. And also we want to be doing the right thing as far as protecting the government's information and being good stewards of that information. But again, it's not retroactive to contracts that you currently have.
Super. Now we do have a question from the audience, and the question is about timing again. And this is important because, time is money, and then planning ahead is important. The question is, when do I need my CMMC by? So can we talk about any of the dates that we know of that are lying ahead? And I'll open that for anybody. Let's start with Cheryl, and then maybe go to Steve.
Well, it's going to be dependent upon your contract. So if you're already within a contract, you will need to get your certification. There is a 5-year rollout plan, as I think William mentioned that we have until 2025. But you're going to need to be prepared for that. So your timeline is within five years, but you need to be ready before that time, because there may be contracts that you want to bid on. And if you don't have your certification, you're not going to be able to bid on those contracts.
Yeah, I agree with Cheryl that you could take sort of a very conservative view and say, hey, I'm just going to, roll the dice and hope that no contract comes up that my company wants to bid on through fiscal year 25. That could work out for you, maybe not. I think the risk certainly in that is that if you wait too long, then a contract comes out, you're not certified, there's no way that you can put in for that. So I think that's certainly an issue. Another thing to keep in mind is that as of November 30th, 2020, with I believe it was the DFARS, the 7019 clause, that everyone should have gone in and done at least a NIST 800-171 assessment and put that score into the SPRS, which is the Supplier Performance. Help me on the R. I'll get back to you on it's SPRS in that database, and that you would need to go in and enter that score in so that the government can then look you up and see what your self-attested score is in that. So
super. Thanks, Steve. It sounds like a reporting system to me, and if you're in military parlance.
You're correct. Thank you, sir.
Hey, a couple other questions are popping in from the field, and so this really ties in with what Cheryl and Steve just talked about, and I'll open it up for our panelists to answer. But you're telling me I have to get certified, but now how do the folks out there, how do they know which contracts require the CMMC certification? Will it be very clear when the solicitation comes out?
Correct. I would say yes. The contract itself will specify CMC level requirements, but again, all requirements will be all contracts will require CMC level 1 or 3 by 2025.
Okay, so that was a very clear statement there. All contracts will require CMMC level 1 through 3 by 2025. So that answered a couple other ones. We'll come back and ask a question about the different levels in a minute. But go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. One thing that as we're talking about this, that NIST 800-171 really covers a lot of this stuff. And a lot of these things should already be on your guys' radar. These aren't new things. There are 20 added as part of this requirements that are going to be required for this. But if you're currently using unclassified information, you should already be on this roadmap and you should be headed in the right direction. A lot of this is really focused on making sure that you actually are doing it, because a lot of this is up to this point has been self-verification. And that's kind of been a problem because there's a lot of people that thought they complied, that thought they understood it. And to be honest with you, the real reason a lot of this is coming to light is because we've had contractors that have fallen down on the security front and really put it at risk some of the information for our customers and for our country. Because when it really comes down to it, we're serving the American citizens, and it's our responsibility to make sure that this information is not passed on to foreign governments, other host nations that we may be involved in. And so a lot of this has been a long time coming, but now comes the point where they're saying, look, you've got to have a third party come in here and show us that you're doing it. It's not good enough anymore just to say, yeah, I'm following all the rules. You've actually got to show it, because we've just had too many contractors that have just not been up to the bar of responsibility with that.
Great,
Yeah,
thanks, William. Go ahead, Steve.
I would like to add to that. And I agree with William's comments, especially, with regard to NIST 800-171, as members of the DIB, we should have been self-attesting to that back in 2017. So again, this is not new completely. Again, there's an additional 20 controls for maturity level 3, but for as far as just the self-attestation part, that's been around for almost 4 years now. And then for those of you that want some background on, when Will talked about, that information reaching our adversaries, for those of you that haven't read the Deliver Uncompromised MITRE report that came out in August of 2017, I would highly recommend pulling that up. You can Google it up, check it out. It's really one of the foundational documents that led to CMMC, to DoD instituting this program. So if you really want to dig down a little bit and say, hey, what has really caused this? That's one of the foundational documents from that. Thanks.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Steve and William. And what we'll do is we'll try to put links to those two comments that were just made about NIST and the other documents Steve mentioned, put them in the comment box for you to find, because everybody should know where to go, but that's not always the case. So I've got a question out there from, looks like a fellow Marquette graduate, Steve Natchke, and he asks, how does this affect micro contractors, independent consultants and folks like that are like a 1 or 2 person organization? Anybody want to take a stab at that? It sounds like it will apply.
Absolutely. I'll take that one.
Okay. Go ahead, John.
It definitely will apply. Any FCI or CUI information that flows down to that level of organization, that level CMMC level needs to apply as well, if that's level 1 or level 3. So you're definitely in scope.
In addition to that, John, it may apply in situations where you really wouldn't think of it. If you're the cleaner of a particular space that deals with unclassified information, if you have access to that information, whether it be, through secure disposal of that information or whatever, you may be required to meet that requirements just simply because you have access to that information. So it not only applies to the contractors and the subcontractors, but it can apply in situations that you may not readily think about, such as document disposal and cleaning of secure spaces where this information is handled.
Super. Anybody else want to add to that? I've got more questions coming in. Okay. Cheryl, I'm going to come back to you because we've got to revisit on a question about where can I find the approved third-party providers to assist my organization. So clearly, the folks out there don't want to go out and spend money on somebody they think is a certified provider and find out they're wrong. Can you address that point again?
Yes, that is going out to the CMMC AB's website. They are responsible for that ecosystem. So everyone has to go through them for their accreditation and approval to provide services. So if you want to make absolutely sure that you're going out to that website, and hopefully my link got copied out there to you. So that's CMMC, the CMMC AB's website that will have the organizations that are certified. And as of today, there are 3 accredited C3PAO organizations.
Okay, so that's not a lot of them right now. So I guess the lesson is learn who you're talking to.
Right.
Yeah. So we've got another question coming in. And as you look at the process we're talking about, the question is this. So the readiness assessment is really the first step before hiring a third-party assessor. What is included in a readiness assessment, and how long does this process take? I'll start with Steve and then throw it over to John and see if anybody else wants to jump in. So the first step, in a readiness assessment is your own assessment, then hire a third party. What's included in that?
Well, I think when we're talking about a readiness assessment, we're really talking about and I'm not an IT person by training, but there's plenty of other people on this panel that are. But my answer would be, from a facility security officer's perspective, would be you want to do a gap analysis on where are you not meeting the mark on those controls that NIST 800-171 talks about. So bringing in a subject matter expert that can provide you, look at your procedures, look at your policies, look at how you store your data, specifically your CUI or your FCI data, how you're doing all that, and for them to then look at, well, what do we need to fix? What are you maybe lacking in a little bit? What controls are you not meeting? And then give you a plan to get you where you need to go. And I'll turn it over to my other panelists who are more IT knowledgeable than myself.
No, that definitely is the first
John,
step,
go
is
ahead.
to do it. Yeah, that's definitely his first step, is to do a gap analysis to see where the organization is at and what they're lacking. The interesting part of the question of how long does this take, that is a common question. That's a good question, and that really relies solely on the OSC themselves. How much money do they want to throw at this? How fast they want to meet certain deadlines? That will determine the speed of the project.
Great. And then I'd ask William or Cheryl if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, a lot of this is looking at your risk. There's a lot to this. It's massive. So where's the best bang for your buck? I mean, all of us have the limitations of resources, money, and we all have to figure out where is the biggest hole and fill the biggest hole first. And a lot of times we forget that. We try and put 10 fingers in 10 holes and try and solve everything at once. And really what needs to be done is get someone in there to help you walk through, okay, what are my issues and what are the biggest ones? Some of these issues require next to no money and very little labor to solve. And other ones are very expensive, and if you don't have the right expertise in-house, impossible to do on your own. So you really need to identify, where are my holes, which ones are the biggest ones, and start with the low-hanging fruit. Right now is a great time to be doing that, looking through each of these things and saying, okay, I still have some time here. What can I do between now and the day that I'm certified to shore up this? And any organization, all organizations can do something. Even the ones that meet certification, this is a constant battle. This isn't something where you do it once and, oh yeah, I got my certification, we're good to go, I don't ever have to think about this again. No, that in the world of cybersecurity, what works today, tomorrow, somebody found a new hole that totally changes the landscape. So this is a constant reevaluation of, where am I at? What's going on around me? And how can I best effectively solve these problems?
I think that's an excellent point, William. It's not a one and done. Thank you. Cheryl, any thoughts you can add to that? And we've got a couple more questions coming in.
Yes. I totally agree with what William is saying. I think the other key thing to this is the fact that you also, once you plug all those holes, you have to think about, I have to practice this and I have to show maturity. And I'm going to have to do that over a period of time to gather up this objective history that the assessor is going to want to see. And so at a minimum, you should be looking at, once you plugged all those holes, is 6 months. So someone asked about the time. So you should say, once I've implemented all of these changes to mitigate those risks, I now need to have a practice in place and collecting evidence showing that I am doing this and being able to show this maturity.
Super, thanks. I'm going to go to one of the panel or one of the questions from the audience from Mandar, and it's a really thoughtful question and a thoughtful point. So DoD is requiring this. So what other sectors do we think is going to require this type of certification in the future, whether it's critical infrastructure like water or civil and municipalities? This is a great question, and I'll open up. I'll start with Cheryl. What do you think? Is it going to stay in DoD, or could this migrate elsewhere?
No, it's already being discussed among other federal agencies. In fact, the Department of Homeland Security came out with something indicating that they were going to be taking a look at the CMMC maturity model.
Super. Steve, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I agree with Cheryl that definitely other agencies. I think right now it's probably fair to say that they're taking a sort of wait and see attitude as far as how DoD implements this throughout the defense industrial base. But I think overall, in whether they agree or not with the methodology about how they're doing that, you can't dispute that if the bottom line is to protect our valuable assets, as it's designated either CUI, FCI, and whether that's coming from DoD or DHS or any other government agency, it's the importance of we can't underestimate the importance of it. And again, as several of the panelists have mentioned, protecting that to make sure it doesn't get in the hands of our adversaries or into those, we've already, or if we have systems or weapons that are compromised already before they're even rolled out to our troops, then that really puts us in jeopardy. So I see it definitely rolling out across the whole of government. It's just probably a matter of how that's going to happen in the timeline.
Yeah, super. Thanks, William. Do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. Coming, from the commercial world, there's a lot of water infrastructure, power infrastructure, building automation systems, power control systems that really could really do great with the NIST system. The 171 is really a smaller subset of that, the 53, the risk management framework. And it's right now, I'm using it every day in the USACE and the DoD contracts, trying to make sure that they're secure. I'm doing it on power systems. I'm doing it on water systems, doing it on building systems, security systems, all kinds of systems. We're doing this for the government, but we're doing it for those systems. So it only makes sense to expand this out to the rest of the country. Currently power may go for one particular risk model where water may go for something else, and different companies go for different risk models. But having NIST as that center point in the future only makes sense because it's government sanctioned. It's where the government's headed, and it allows us to have one complete model and one common look at this. The big thing that we struggle with right now with so many different risk models is there's holes in each of the models, and everybody's thinking slightly different. And then they got to say, well, now I got to learn this other model because this company that I'm working with now does this other model, and it's close, but it's not quite the same. And there's a lot of downtime and frustration jumping between these different models. So all of those systems focusing on NIST in the future, I think, is really where we're headed. I think it's just a matter of time because, at this point, the DoD and the government's doing it and perfecting it. And in the future, it's only going to make sense for power companies to go, wait a second here. The government's already gone through this. They're already using it on their power systems. It only makes sense for me to do it to my substations that provide it to the government and then expand that on to a bigger standpoint. And
that's great.
This is something that we really need to focus on as we move forward.
Yeah, that's great, William. And I think for everybody that's out there listening, most companies, one of the questions you always ask yourself, is how do I differentiate between my company and somebody else? So, if you can show other non-governmental clients that you're certified in the CMMC, to me, that says a lot. And it really highlights what William said, but it helps differentiate, the fact that you can control your information better. We're going to expand a little bit. We don't want to get into too much detail, but, we've heard about levels 1 through 3 and needing to achieve those by 2025. How many more levels are there? I think there's 5 levels in the model. Can somebody briefly describe the different levels that exist in CMMC for the audience?
Sure, I'll take that one, Rick. There are 5 levels. Level 1 is protecting the federal contract information. So at a minimum, your organization should already be adhering to that. Level 2 is a bridge between level 1 and 3. And so level 3 is managing and showing that you're managing this practice. And it consists of 130 controls. Then you have level 4 and 5. 4 and 5 are more advanced capabilities, but as of today, we're still waiting on pending guidelines from the AB. About 1% of the organization's defense industrial base contractors will fall in the level 4 and 5, and anywhere between the 99% between the level 1 and level 3. So does that help out any?
Yeah. But I think for people out there, when you think of level 4 and 5, that's extremely high level, and that's probably some of the contractors that we would call OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, like your Boeings and Raytheons and et cetera, et cetera. Is that what you're alluding to?
Yes, exactly.
Great.
So they would fall in that 1% and would need that would implement those advanced capabilities.
Super. Any more thoughts on the different levels?
Yeah. One way that simple mind, I guess, but I break this down for me is if you're involved with federal contract information or plan to be, you need to be at minimum a level 1. And if you're involved with unclassified information, that CUI information, you need to be at minimum of level 3. So that kind of gives you some markers for the companies that are already involved. If you are at using those two types of information, you know where you need to be. And if you're looking to be, that helps you out, gives you some mile markers to strive for.
Great. Thanks, William. Any other thoughts on the different levels? I've got a couple more questions coming in. Okay, next question is, it's again, a timing thing. Certifications, I think a few of you hit on it. It's not one and done. It's not I'm certified and I'm good for the next, 100 years. So really, how often do we have to renew our CMMC certification? I ask Steve or Cheryl to start with that one.
I can take that one. Every 3 years.
Okay, that's a pretty simple answer then. So once you get certified up to level 3, then but it doesn't mean you sit and rest on your laurels during those 3 years. You got to stay attentive to what's going on around you. Go ahead.
Yeah. In addition to that, it's not just every 3 years. In the fact that once you're doing these things, you need to continuously record that you are completing them. You need to continue to get that documentation in so that when that certification comes up at that 3-year point, you have a history log showing, yes, I've been compliant over these 3 years. I've made sure that my users only have access to what they're supposed to have. I've done all these things over the past 3 years. So you renew your certification every 3 years, but you continue to need to document your compliance through that time period. So don't just think, oh, well, I got mine. I'll deal with it again in 3 years. No, you need to continue to keep that information up to date and show that you have been compliant over those 3 years.
Super. Steve, you want to add anything?
Yes, thanks, Rick. I have one thing to add to that and to keep in mind. So we're talking about this 3-year period. So let's say you go in and you get CMMC level 3 certified in March of 2022, let's say. But a contract comes up at a level 4 that you want to put in for. So this is not to say that 3-year period locks you in concrete for that level 3. You can go back to the AB, to an assessor, and if you've done what you need to do to get that level 4, let's say, if that contract is level 4 and your company really wants to get that contract, you can have an assessor come back out and assess you at that level 4. Now, much of that is still in talks with DoD, like Cheryl mentioned, as far as what that's going to mean at a level 4 and 5. But just the point that, again, you're not set for those 3 years at that level. There's always an ability to sort of upgrade based on contracts that you want to go after.
No, that's great. Thanks for that, Steve. I think some of the people out there might be thinking, what does a renewal process even look like? So let's say the contracts I'm going after kind of stay at level 3. That's where I'm at. I'm good. but my 3 years is coming up. John, can you talk me through what that renewal process might look like?
Sure. Just to tag on to what William said, if you're constantly maintaining your level certification, renewal process will be similar as the first one. You'll contact your C3PAO. You'll get an assessor assigned to you. They'll do the assessment, and if all their practices have been met, you're good to go.
Excellent. So what that means is, good information hygiene. Do the things you're supposed to do, so it's documented. So when it's time to renew, it's a seamless project. That's what I'm hearing.
Absolutely.
Super. Controlled unclassified information is interesting because truly our adversaries can read, unclassified networks and Facebook and the news, and they can read things and piece together and figure out exactly what it is we're doing. I think that's important to know. And so one of the questions that just came in is, what role does the government actually play in designating or identifying CUI as part of a federal contract? Any thoughts on that one? What role does the government play in designating or identifying CUI as part of a new federal contract? I'll open that up to the panel.
I'd be happy to take that, Rick. So the government plays a key piece. The government is whether it's DOD or otherwise, they are ultimately the ones that are saying, hey, this piece of information is CUI. I mean, we as contractors do not say this is CUI from just out of the blue. We're flowing down those controls from DOD or whatever other agency and protecting that information as such. But only the government has the ability to actually say this is or is not CUI. And I think what Rick also gave a great definition, but by not saying it, you just basically defined classification by compilation, right? So much of what our adversaries want, I would say up to the upper 90% is available to them in open source CUI type information. Obviously that very small percentage at the top might be US classified information, but suffice it to say that a lot of information is out there that enables them to put all those pieces together, which is, again, one of the fundamental reasons why this program is being rolled out, to be able to further protect that information.
Super. Thanks. John, do you want to add to that?
I do. Also, keep in mind that government contractors and procurement officers are human. So sometimes they forget to label contracts correctly as FCI or CUI. So as far as the Christian doctrine is concerned, it's incumbent on the OSC themselves to label the contracts and their information correctly, and the information if it's FCI and CUI.
Super. And maybe just for sake of expanding on it a little bit, Steve, can you give just any small examples of what you think the audience should know what CUI is? Is it like social security numbers? Is it people's names, contract scopes? What kind of things, just to give people some background, what CUI could be?
So I would tell you that there's a great government website. Now, how many times do you hear that as a preface to an answer? But the U.S. Archives is in charge of the CUI program for the entire government. So if you go to archives.gov/CUI, I believe that is the website, it will tell you everything you want to know and more about CUI. And I do not get any residuals from the U.S. Archives for hawking their website. But in all seriousness, it's a great website. There's many families of different CUI. So PII, personally identifying information, is a subset of CUI, so I always explain to our professionals at Black & Veatch that when they think of CUI, think of that as like the 20,000-foot term for a lot of different types of information. Law enforcement sensitive, which many law enforcement agencies use, that's a form of CUI. PII, for official use only. Critical nuclear weapons design information, or CNWITI, is a form of CUI. There's many, many, many out there. So it's really incumbent on us as members of the DIB to make sure that we're very familiar with those terms. And if you have questions, either the security folks or the IT folks or the project manager should be talking to their government point of contact, the contracting officer, to make sure there's no confusion about what is or is not CUI. Super important.
Okay, that's a great answer. Thanks, Steve, and thanks for posting that website on the page there. I suspect they'll get a lot of hits. But I think the lesson is for companies that are out there, if you don't have your own, security manager, that's a good place to start and to educate your workforce on what is and what is not CUI. So we've got two questions that came in. They're kind of linked, and this is so I'll put them together before we answer them. And it's really about when companies come together. So everybody wants to grow. One way to grow is to acquire another company. So if I'm already CMMC certified and I acquire another company, does our certification apply to them, or do we have to be recertified to take care of that? And then the follow-on is really about subcontractors. So if you got the first one, think acquisitions, but the second one, if you're a sub to another company that has the DoD contract, does that sub also have to be CMMC certified as well? I'll open this one up to the panel to see who wants to start that one off.
I'll take that.
Go ahead, John.
So the organization that was certified level 1 or level 3 before the merger can retain that certification. The merger, the acquisition company that acquired that company is not, that certification does not carry over. They have to get certified in their own, for their own organization. Now, the second part of that question, the second question we had was, again, it goes back to flow down of information. If that subcontractor or has FCI or CUI flow down to it from its prime, then yes, that level 1 or level 3 needs to apply as well to that sub organization.
Super. Anybody want to add to that?
And it can have some interesting implications. For example, if you've got a surveyor out there, and in order to do their job, they need to know some CUI information. Maybe they're surveying a minefield and they need to know some unclassified information about where those mines are. They would fall under that. And so a lot of it's really thinking carefully through the prime. Who do I need to have that CMMC certification, and how do I protect that information? Certain vendors will say, well, we won't provide them the unclassified part and they can complete their project without necessarily being certified. Where in other situations, like surveying a minefield, they're going to need to know that information. So they're going to need that certification. Great.
Any other thoughts on that?
I do have one thought, and this is really more of a question for some of the panelists, is as a facility security officer, does it depend on where that subcontractor is actually accessing that information? In other words, if the prime is giving them access to that CUI on the prime's certified system, and that sub is not storing it or in any way electronically storing it at their own site, how does that apply for a flow down of maturity level certification?
Right, that's where level 1 comes in. You can access information, but as long as you don't store or transmit CUI, that's definitely an option. And a lot of companies are actually doing that. They'll host their infrastructure and they'll host the CUI in their enclave somewhere else, just so that subprimes can access the information, but not download it and so forth.
Okay, so that's pretty good information out there. So think about that. If you're working with subs that aren't to the levels you might want them to be, the architecture you use for information can work to your advantage or disadvantage. We'll take probably one or two more questions from the field out there. And here's the next question. So if our company is not US based, do we still have to be CMMC certified? Or is there a different certification that's out there? So maybe the wording here, not US based. I guess the question is it a US company or not? So let's look at that question maybe from both perspectives. If you're just not based in the US, do you need a different certification?
Well, I'll take that, Rick. I think in that specific case or that question, it doesn't come down to as much about location as it does to the nature of the information that is in that contract. So let's say you're based in Germany, let's say, and you're accessing as part of that contract CUI, then you would need to get that appropriate CMMC certification in order to properly protect that information.
As I would like to add as well, if anything as foreign related, ITAR comes into play as well.
Yeah.
So expert controls will need to be on that, as well as CMMC level 3.
Great. Can you explain ITAR, John?
The ITAR certification compliance standard, there's the actual number, let me get that for you, is DODI 5200.48 for everyone who wants to look that up.
Super.
Yeah, and I can add just a tad on that for as far as ITARs, International Trafficking in Arms Regulations. And so maybe a lot of the contractors out there deal with some of that information. That's very specific and managed by the State Department, Directorate of Defense Trade Controls. I will not acronym you to death, but since we are talking about DoD and the government, we can't help ourselves. But there's a specific number of families in ITAR in the regulation, and so that really involves looking into specifically what information you're dealing with as to whether ITAR is going to apply or not. So
and just kind of the boots on the ground thoughts on this. When I'm traveling internationally working on projects, I have to be very careful and thoroughly go through what's on my laptop and make sure that no information that needs to stay within the United States that's critical goes with me. So from a boots on the ground, it's all about making sure that the information doesn't leave our soil, that we protect those critical infrastructures. And, as we're talking about this, we keep saying the word unclassified. Just because we say unclassified doesn't mean it's not important. There are a lot of engineering technologies, a lot of things that are the foundation, the building blocks for a lot of the things that our government does and securing our nation. And just because it's unclassified doesn't mean it's unimportant or that we can just go around and tell that to anybody. So a lot of these things play into making sure those foundational technologies are protected so that we can build a secure world and a secure country for ourselves.
Yeah, thanks, William. That's a great reminder because I think a lot of our audience members do international travel for the work that they do. And it's things to think about when you're logging into the hotel's Wi-Fi, right? So look, we're kind of at the top of the hour. We can see if there's any more questions. I think we have one more question coming in, we hope. And if not, then I'll start to wrap it up. So I'll pause for just a second, see if there's any other questions out there. Okay, this question just came in. I think I've heard us kind of go roundabout a little bit. How long does a readiness assessment take? Let's say I'm starting from ground zero. I've chimed in today and I've listened and I said, well, I really got to get after this CMMC. How long will it take me to kind of go from ground zero to where we need to be, maybe level 1 through level 3? Any thoughts on that? I'd open it up to the panel.
I'll take that one, Rick. I think I did indicate that it depends, and you have given the example of ground zero. So depending on how much work the organization has to do, in William's terms, to plug the holes. So you could be talking at a minimum of 6 months to a year or longer, because what's key is once you have all of these controls implemented, you have to showcase maturity and show evidence. And so you have to factor that time frame in. And I think that's the key. It's like, how long is it going to take you to get all your risks mitigated? And then from there, you add on a minimum of 6 months to a year, showing the maturity.
Great. And just to remind everybody, between now and 2025, you have to achieve level 3. So this is really good. So I think we'll wrap it up here. I want to thank all of our panelists because I think you provide some great insights today for all the folks that are out there, and especially for our contractors. I think we've tried to give some very useful websites. We'll get those posted in the comments. If you have additional questions, feel free to put them in the comments, and we'll have our panel of experts provide responses to those comments. So I want to thank everybody for what you've done today with the questions you've asked, the answers the panelists have provided. And I'll just tell you that, we're here to help, at Black & Veatch, and we'd be happy to schedule some time to discuss this and further with you. And If you have any other questions, you can even feel free to email us at cmmc@bv.com. Pretty simple. So if you have additional questions for the team, send them to us. We'd love to answer you. This is exciting. I think it's an important thing that we're doing. As one of the questions said, you can see this methodology exporting to municipalities and other businesses that need to protect the information they have, the information they work with, especially if it's proprietary. So we'll stand by, and if there's any questions, get them in the comment box. But otherwise, thanks for being here today with Black & Veatch and the Cybersecurity Model Maturity Certification. Thank you.